If everybody's ready, let's go ahead and call the September 2nd Salina City Planning Commission meeting to order. Before the first item, I'd like to take a second and introduce to all of you Owen Freiberger, who's joining our group. Welcome, Owen.
Thank you.
Hello, Owen.
At present, the makeup of the commission is 7 members with 2 openings, one of which would be for an out-of-city representative, so we'll be seeking to fill those as soon as we can.
Okay. All right, item number 1 is approval of the minutes of the August 19, the regular meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I would move we approve the minutes as stated.
Second. Any discussion? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passed. Thank you. Item number 2.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be recusing myself from this item. I'm a member of the Salvation Army Board, so I'll stand down.
Thank you very much. Item number 2 is application CU 14-4 filed by the Salvation Army requesting approval of a conditional use permit to allow construction of a 56 by 100 foot storage building in an R2 multifamily residential zoning district. The property that is the subject of this application is legally described as lots 5 and 7, block 14, Episcopal Military Edition of the City of Salinas, Lane County, Kansas, and addressed as 1106 North 7th Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an application for a conditional use permit. The request is approval from the Planning Commission to expand the existing Salvation Army Center campus into the areas surrounded by blue on your map there, and also as part of that to construct an accessory storage building in that same area. The property we're talking about is on the North 7th Street on the east side and between Hamilton Avenue and I believe Harsh to the north, or excuse me, Antrim to the north. And as you can see in the packet, the Salvation Army first established a presence here on North Santa Fe in 1947 and have been incrementally expanding, adding on, and enhancing the services they provide in this location since that time. The most recent activity you can see just to the right of the blue box there. In 2011, the Planning Commission reviewed and approved a conditional use permit application that covered 7 platted lots on the west side of North Santa Fe to allow construction of a vestibule addition and also additional off-street parking on North Santa Fe south of the Salvation Army Center. So back in 1996, the Planning Commission approved a plan for a sports court and a parking area there. And so by way of background, Salvation Army recently completed the purchase of 2 R2 zone lots that you see outlined there. They're directly south of the outdoor sports court and directly east of a parking lot that they recently just completed. They have identified a need as a board for additional storage space for their football program equipment and also for foodstuffs for their kitchen, which is located there in the main community center building. And to help meet that need, they're proposing to construct a 56 by 100 foot metal storage building on lots 5 and 7 behind the Salvation Army Center and the recently constructed parking lot. The site we're talking about today is 80 feet wide and 120 feet deep, and there was a meeting between representatives of the Salvation Army Board and the city's development review team in May discussing this storage building, and staff identified that it could not be built as proposed without multiple variances that might be needed to accommodate it on that lot. And we also noted that a conditional use permit would have to be applied for and approved to expand the campus. We looked at the order of things. We thought it would be best to look at expansion of the campus that we knew specifically what could or could not be built as part of that expansion. So in terms of order of things, the variance application for the storage building went to the Board of Zoning Appeals in July. And again, the purpose of that, we worked with representatives of Salvation Army to come up with the best size and shape of the building to fit the lot, realizing that even with that, it was not going to fit in with the basic residential setback requirements. So on July the 17th, the Board of Zoning Appeals approved a front yard setback variance and a rear yard setback variance to allow a building to be placed in that configuration there, subject to, obviously, approval by the Planning Commission of the proposed use and the proposed expansion of the campus area. So your role today, while taking note of the dimensions and location of the building, is primarily to focus on whether the change in use from residential to a storage building would dominate or cause injury to the adjacent properties, and secondly, whether the plan that is proposed would be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and streetscape. And so today's hearing process allows adjacent property owners to be notified of the change in use and to comment and ask questions about the Salvation Army's plans. So on page 4 of your report, we walked you through the basic zoning requirements there. A community center such as the Salvation Army is a conditional use that is permissible in the R2 district. The Salina YMCA is located in an R3 residential district as a conditional use, and this is somewhat similar to that in terms of being a community center use. And so we've noted that a setback variance on the front and rear were approved. The 20-foot setback requirement from the residents to the south is being complied with. We took the approach that we would combine lots 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. So in terms of looking at lot coverage and total coverage, we basically said that the zoning lot extends up into that area. So starting here and down to here is the area that we used to determine that 23% of that lot would be covered by buildings. There was a parking variance that was granted in 1977 that essentially exempted the Salvation Army from off-street parking requirements. And so essentially the parking that was done there was done on a voluntary basis and not based on any parking standard or minimum required by the city. And then we pointed out, to the best of our knowledge, we're not seeing any signs proposed, although a sign up to 32 square feet would be allowed on the building. And we do have a requirement for front yard green space. There is space set aside for that, but nothing indicated on the plan. And so as we talk about the welfare and convenience of the public, the Salvation Army is proposing to add storage space in proximity to their kitchen and more controlled and organized space for the Salvation Army youth football program. And they believe that putting a building on this lot could contribute to the welfare and convenience of the public. It would put a vacant, unutilized lot into productive use, and it would provide additional storage space for food and youth football programs that will allow the center to function more efficiently and effectively. And we would agree that it could contribute to the welfare and convenience of the public by providing additional secured storage to better account for the city's needs, or the center's needs, and decrease the trips that they currently have to make across the street on the east side of Santa Fe, where some of the foodstuffs are being stored now. In terms of looking at the surrounding property, we've got the properties bounded by residential dwellings to the west and south, and the existing Salvation Army Center to the north and east. They've been in this location for well over 50 years. We haven't received many complaints about spillover activities from the community center, and so we would agree that this is a well-established use and anchor for the neighborhood. And so it's not a question of their presence in the neighborhood, but it is your role to look at their plan and to see if there's possible modifications to the site or conditions of approval that could mitigate the impact of construction of this building could have on surrounding properties. In other words, have they done the best they could to mitigate any impacts? We've got a couple misstatements in the staff report on page 6. We indicated that the property owner to the south objects to the plans. It's actually the property owner to the north that is the owner of a vacant lot north of the sports court. And they submitted a letter in your packet. They're not indicating what aspects of the plan or project they're objecting to. They just state a general objection. So one thing that you need to consider today is whether the storage building of the dimensions and location proposed would dominate or overwhelm the immediate neighborhood. And then a second misunderstanding, which I think the board will clarify for us today. The city building and zoning codes have a classification of building called non-climatized storage, which basically is a building that is essentially a building, a concrete floor, and electricity that doesn't have public occupancy or climatized control or plumbing connections. And it's been indicated to staff that the food storage portion would be climate controlled, and that there is a plan for adding restrooms to the equipment storage portion. So although we have characterized this in our report as a non-climatized storage building, it has been indicated to us that there are plans to climatize the building that will primarily affect the building code classification and shouldn't affect your decision today, but we did want to clarify that the food storage portion will probably have heating and cooling, and the equipment storage area could have a restroom. There are certainly plumbing connections available. There used to be a house on this property that was connected to water and sewer, but that will be addressed during any building permit review. It should not affect parking because of the variance that was granted relating to off-street parking in 1977. As far as landscaping, if this were treated similar to the parking lot and other developments in the area, they would need to provide a minimum of 800 square feet of front yard green space along 7th Street, and based on that, place 2 tree units within that front yard area between the building and front property line. As far as the comprehensive plan, this type of use is identified as a secondary use, as a civic and institutional use in a urban residential land use area. So we have summarized on page 8 some suggested findings that you could cite if you are inclined to approve this request, and approval of the request would be based on those findings. That is option 1. Option 2 would be to approve the application with any conditions you think are appropriate or any revisions to the site plan there that you see that you think are appropriate and necessary to protect the surrounding neighborhood. You could postpone consideration, continue the hearing if you think you lack information to reach a decision, or you could deny the application if you don't think the required findings can be made, or if you think this building and use would be incompatible with the neighborhood. Our recommended conditions we have outlined on page 9 of your report, and that would be if a conditional use permit and site plan were approved as submitted, then our recommendation would be to carry over the Board of Zoning Appeals conditions about directing runoff to 7th Street, making sure that garage door openings don't face the rear alley or 7th Street, that the site plan be revised to show a front yard landscape area containing at least 2 street trees that would be on private property. If there's any lighting involved, that those light fixtures and the cut sheets for those would be provided to city staff before installation. Number 5 is essentially the what you see is what you get condition, that the plans that are presented to you today is what gets built. And then item 6 there, the Planning Commission previously had a condition that we're talking about a fairly narrow 10-foot alley that really can't accommodate two-way traffic, and so we have tried to reinforce the use of this as a coming in from the west and circulating up to the north. And previously there was some signage that directed people to go to the north, to exit north down the paved portion of the alley out to Antrim. And so that signage, I believe, is no longer there, and so that would reinforce that as the preferred method of circulation, because at a 10-foot alley you can't really accommodate two-way traffic, so the preferred circulation would be to enter here and exit to the north up to Antrim, utilizing as much of the paved alley where it's not paved down in this location. So with that, staff would be available to answer any questions, but we did want to clarify this is not, as we called it, a non-climatized storage building, but it would be climatized, and it could very well have plumbing and a restroom, but it would still be characterized as a storage building use. And that the letter that you have in your packet is the owner of the vacant lot to the north. If you could go to some aerial photo, John, either the properties map or there's a property right here that's vacant, and that, excuse me, right here.
Yeah.
And the recipient, or the letter that you have in your packet, is from the owner of that lot right there, which does not directly abut the, and we had mistakenly believed the letter came from this owner, but it's actually this owner right there.
Yeah.
So with that, we'd be open to any questions Commission might have. Said I can't, we did not speak to that owner, so I can't tell you exactly what they were objecting to, other than we included that in your packet.
Any questions for staff?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Andrew for his prescience, because that was exactly the question I was going to ask, to be able to see which lot that was. So,
Let's go ahead and hear from the applicant. Somebody like to speak for us? Please state your name and address for the record,
Okay.
please.
My name is Steve Snyder. I live at 655 Guernsey Drive here in Salina. I've been a member of the Salvation Army Advisory Board sometime in the early 90s. So I've been involved with some of the projects that were mentioned earlier. I think Dean went through some of the other buildings that were on the report or listed in here, but I just kind of want to give you what came up here recently to start this whole need for a project of this scope and size. Prior to this past year, the football storage of equipment and the food storage that's used on a daily basis was both stored in the building that's located on the east side of Santa Fe. That was intended to be a garage for the canteens that the Salvation Army uses in emergencies, natural disasters. There's been some insurance issues of storing food and football equipment in the same building without having a secure dividing wall separating the two. And we hadn't obviously been complying with that, because they had football in one side and and food maybe right next to it or adjacent to it in some manner that didn't comply. So that was obviously one issue. This summer, and I think even in the past, the football storage has been stored, some of it anyway, over at the Central High School, the annex, I believe. And now the food is stored in the gymnasium, which does not allow, obviously, use of at least that half of the gym. So we've created another problem, but we need to address, for insurance reasons. To go along with that issue, parking the two canteens out on the street, or at least in the parking lot outside, has led to some vandalism, where if we could park them in the garage that they were intended and built for, the building, we think we could eliminate or at least reduce the potential vandalism. That was an issue. The other thing that has come up, especially any of you who follow any football sports-related activities in the last year or so, the injury situation, and specifically concussions, has been a big issue. And from everything from young kids, which the Salvation Army, obviously starting in the 4th grade, up to the NFL is big news at this time. And previously, with the approximately 700 kids that take part, not all from Salina, but a lot of them are from the surrounding communities, and we're seeing a big growth in our 8-man program compared to the previous 11-man program that was popular as the schools start, or the towns start getting smaller and the schools consolidate. Sometimes they've gone to an 8-man, so their younger teams will do that as well. In the past, we've allowed those teams to store equipment and just keep them there. And without a centralized inventory control, let's put it, we may have some helmets that are not only not certified, and the certification was what we did was every 3 years. Today, those helmets are no longer usable after a 10-year period. They can't be just recertified every 3 years and go to 15 years or so. After 10 years, we have to send them in. They're destroyed. I assume they're recycled at some point and they meet some certification. We do not want to take that chance of having a helmet that is not certifiable out in a community and then have a young person injured with a head injury, neck, or concussions that could be related to that helmet. So we've got a series of issues that all kind of build up at once here in the last year or so, which led to the need for additional storage. And the other thing is just well, as far as the food goes, it's the convenience of having this food storage, which is basically right out the back door off the kitchen of the main building that's been there for all these years. Instead of walking across the street, carrying boxes, or having a little small truck or whatever it takes to load them back over there, they can easily have access to the food storage. And of course, the football is the issue here is storing and controlling all the equipment from all these communities, so that the football guys have a lot better control and of their inventory to make sure we don't fall out of compliance on a safety issue. That's kind of what led us to this situation. We looked at the size of the building. Initially, it was proposed to be a little larger than this due to the size of the lot, and the DRT review was determined that we needed to make it a little bit smaller. But we feel that this size of building is the size that is needed for not only our existing use, but some small expansion. We're not going to say we're going to be full the first day, but we hope that that we can handle all of any increased growth. And there may be a point where we just can't physically accept any more teams from around the state due to travel, due to lack of available football facilities. Everybody wants to play on a Friday night or a Saturday in all the cities. So we've got that issue that we have to let the football guys adjust their schedule, and which obviously means adjusting the number of teams that are allowed to come in our league. And travel is another one. Teams from Hayes and Great Bend go to the west where they used to come here. and it's a little more of a convenience for them and their families as well, and we understand that, but it works into everybody's, I think, benefit in that situation. So that's kind of where we have generated this request, and kind of a little bit of background. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you may have, and both majors are here, and as well as Mike McMahon, who has a big part in the football operations and has done so for many years.
Mr. Snyder, this perhaps has no bearing at all on the building situation, but can you explain a little bit further about the teams outside of Salina storing equipment? What are the circumstances that cause them to have that need for storage?
Well, I think it was a situation for habit, where if you had a team, I'll use Concordia or Beloit, or one of the teams that's 50, 60 miles north of here. Right. Instead of they would just be allowed to keep it. And the next year they may have some new kids. They'd ask for some more, and all of a sudden, I think, and obviously not using that particular city as an issue, right, but one of the teams, I think they found they had enough equipment for 30 kids over the years, or maybe it was even more. Well, one, we need to utilize that equipment better, and especially now that there's some regulations on that, on those, especially the helmets, that we have to have some control. So I think it was a matter of convenience. Okay, we know you had 15 kids last year, and you've got 15 full sets, and over a period of 2 or 3 years, and even sometime there has been Sam Killian is the current football director, lives in Russell. Mike lives here. Previously there was another individual who ran that, so there's been some of that maybe there wasn't good coordination from one to the other. When Sam took over, that knows, well, somebody had all these old equipment. We just want to make sure that that's stored here in a safe place. We can control, and obviously can recognize the available years left on them on a helmet.
Okay, thank you.
I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't, that you'll be adding square footage with the new building over what you currently have.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know by how much? Like how much larger your new facility
Well,
will
obviously,
be?
this is, 5,600, and I'm going to have to turn back. Do you know what the existing garage size is, a double garage?
Across the street?
Yes.
It's probably 60 foot by probably 20, something like that. It's not that big.
It's this building right here. It's fairly narrow. It's like a garage type building, but they've got some of the foodstuffs were stored here historically, and they've moved them over to the gymnasium here.
I'm going to, if we say that's 1,500 square feet, maybe 2,000. I'm taking a guess here, but yes, this was obviously considerably larger for both food and football.
Okay.
I have a question, maybe not some, well, it's kind of for Salvation Army as well as staff, but you'll still need to walk outside to carry your food items to the kitchen from the storage facility?
That's correct.
So the second half of my question, is that alley an easement alley? Is that alley a utility alley?
It is a publicly owned alley. It's an alley right-of-way, meaning the city of Salina owns it. And it's a public alley from Hamilton all the way up to Antrim. There's a portion right in here that is paved, and that was done in partnership with the city back in the 1990s.
But the purpose for my question, if the alley doesn't have any utilities, and the primary function of the alley now is starting to become Salvation Army, is there any way that alley could be
The alley does contain utilities.
Okay,
The alley has an 8-inch sanitary sewer that runs the length of it. So even if the alley was vacated, it would still be a utility easement.
That was perfect. Because I thought then you could set the building over to have a little breezeway between the two and not have to go outside. But with an 8-inch, you don't want to move a sewer line probably.
Probably not.
Especially not an 8-inch.
Yeah,
Okay.
Unfortunately, in terms of when we look at things in terms of a campus, the unfortunate thing that prevents this from being a true campus is it's bisected by a public alley that can't really go away. So for our purposes, we have a 7th Street campus, which is these lots here, and this is the Santa Fe campus. John, could you go back to that yellow, the properties map? That's the best way to see it. But essentially, you've got all this is Salvation Army. You got this 10-foot strip here that separates it from this, and then they have this property over here, which is parking, playground, and a storage building. But the primary difference is before they were trucking food from here over to here, and now they would just be able to go across the alley like that, which would be more convenient right outside the back door.
Okay.
All right. If there are any other questions, thank you, Mr. Snyder. This is a public hearing. Are there members of the public who would like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, we'll bring
we
it back
got
up
no phone calls or any other feedback other than the letter from the owner of the vacant lot to the north.
Any questions or discussion here at the table?
I'd make a motion.
I'm ready to hear it.
Make a motion that we approve CU 14-4, including the 6 staff recommendations as presented to us in the packet.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Motion passes. So your next step would be to submit your plans for a building permit to construct the building.
So we have a meeting on the 8th, or is that contingent upon the?
No, this action is final.
Final?
Yes, this does not need to go to the city commission, so this is final approval, so you may now proceed to a building permit.
Okay, so that, and excuse me for being ignorant, but I go to architect, which we secured architect. So when we go to get the permit, does the architect need to have the plans and the engineer, not the engineer, but the general contractor, et cetera?
Yeah.
How does that work?
They would need to identify who your licensed contractor would be that would be erecting the building.
So I submit that to you then?
Yep, upstairs in the same room.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
So we'll be sending you a letter summarizing today's action and what your next steps are.
Thank you very, very much.
The commission doesn't want to dismiss you all without acknowledging the fact that the Salvation Army has been an integral part not only of the Salina city, but the communities surrounding Salina for as long as I've been in Salina, and they have filled a tremendous need, and we appreciate your looking ahead to keep your facilities up to date so they continue to meet those needs of our kids. So thank you.
And on behalf of the Salvation Army and the board members, we appreciate your action today. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you for your service.
Moving on to item number 3, application PDD 04-5A, filed by Quick Shop, Inc., requesting approval of an amendment to the architectural restrictions adopted as part of the preliminary development plan and planned development district ordinance of the Georgetown Village Place PDD located at the northeast corner of Fairdale Drive and Crawford Street, applicable to the Quick Shop convenience store located at 657 Fairdale Road. That's a mouthful.
Well, I think today's action, this is a public hearing item, and it kind of sets out the advantages and disadvantages of the planned development district. And the planned development district concept is that the primary difference between a simple rezoning action by the Planning Commission and a planned development district is that a planned development district is a request for zoning change that involves a specific plan that tells the neighbors exactly what they can expect to get. And what we're dealing with today is a planned development district that was originally approved in August of 1976, so it's rather stale. And the best place that I can refer you is we have a 5-page staff report, but at the end of that, there's kind of a chronological summary of what occurred here. But the Planning Commission approved a final development plan for a neighborhood shopping center here that was called the Georgetown Village Place Shopping Center, and that plan called for some 35,000 square feet of commercial space and 234 parking spaces. That plan was recorded in the Register of Deeds office, and the first and only real development that occurred as a result of that was construction or a permit for a Quick Shop convenience store that was issued in May of 1979. And as part of the planned development district that was reviewed by the neighbors at the time, there was an architectural theme, and John kind of has that with slide 4 and slide 5, where this was the overall plan and how Quick Shop fit into that overall plan. And then slide 5 is kind of a snapshot of all of the buildings. We're going to have this same architectural treatment and a roof line with a mansard and wood siding and the wood shake shingles. And so Quick Shop was built with a roof in accordance with that plan. And so in 1995, there was a request filed to amend the architectural restrictions, and that was done in relation to a re-signing plan. And that, what John is showing you here now, dates 2004, so I want to clarify that. In 1995, there were some things that were done up there without knowledge of staff or the neighborhood, and basically there was a request to the Planning Commission to kind of retroactively approve those, and that request was denied by the Planning Commission and the request was withdrawn. Then there was a plan to revamp the canopies here. So John, if you could go back to what you were showing before, that's actually the 2004 plan. There was a plan to replace the fascia on the canopies, and that would be slot 7 and 8. And then the basically before they were basically painted with no logo. They were just a brown earth tone canopy, and so the Planning Commission and City Commission approved an amendment that basically lifted the architectural restrictions as they applied to the gas canopy and signs, but did not lift the restrictions as it related to the main building. And then in 2005, we had our other activity up there, which was a new office building, headquarters for Booker, Willis, and Ratliff, which is now the Lochner Group. And then in 2009, the Planning Commission reviewed a plan that essentially eliminated or wiped out the shopping center planned development district and substituted a townhome development in the middle of the block, which is known as Georgetown Villas. And so that brings us back to today, and staff had some contact with representatives of Quick Shop, and the wood shake shingles and the current roof is not in good condition, and recognizing that this was a unique property amongst the Quick Shops in Salina and that it was subject to the current architectural restrictions, they have filed this request to repeal or eliminate those restrictions once and for all. And so these are some photographs of what it currently looks like, and the plan is essentially to eliminate all the wood shake shingles and convert that to a conventional asphalt shingle roof. The question would remain essentially if that occurred in the future, if they wish to eliminate the mansard and that style of roof completely, they would be able to, and to just go back to the conventional quick shop look. But the driving force behind this is a desire to replace the wood shake with conventional asphalt shingles, and there may be some longer term development plans or redevelopment plans down the road. But there had been a recurring theme with the previous Planning Commission decisions that we had these architectural standards that applied to the remainder, and they ought to continue to apply to Quick Shop. But essentially, with the approval and the development of the townhome development, it's pretty clear that there is never going to be a Georgetown Village shopping center for this to be matched up with, and so the original purpose of the architectural restrictions and the common architectural theme really no longer serve their original purpose. So, John, I don't know where you have it saved, but could you find me the current ordinance for this property that I asked you to scan, and then just go to page 2. So essentially today there's a condition that this property be developed in accordance with the architectural renderings presented back in the 1970s that contained the wood beams, and all the things that are and so item D says the architectural restrictions shall remain in effect as to the convenience store building shall not apply to the fascia of the gas island canopy. And so essentially the request is to wipe this out once and for all. It would not change the uses of the property or anything else. It would simply remove these architectural restrictions from the equation, and Quick Shop would be the judge of what they want the exterior of the building to look like. And so obviously you could approve their request and agree to lift those restrictions. You could deny their request and keep the original restrictions in place. You could recommend some alternative to the wood shake and keep restrictions in place. Again, we want to remind you, and usually you don't have a 1976 to 2014 time lag, but the submittal by a developer
Time lag, all right.
of a planned development district recommends a firm commitment that actual developments will follow the proposed plans and architectural restrictions. That's the one side. On the other hand, it's clear that the original intent is no longer there, and the remainder of the site will never be developed in accordance with those original restrictions. And then the only other thing, which is one of the reasons for the planned development district, was, but if you stop and think about it, this is the only site zoned for convenience store use east of the river, and so we don't have a abundance of commercial zone property east of the river. This is one of those sites. It is the only site east of the river that sells gasoline and has a convenience store associated with it. And so, John, if you could go back to that aerial photo. I did want to point out that the zoning maps and such in the packet were somewhat confusing, but essentially we have this piece here. This piece here is also Zone C2 neighborhood commercial, and then this piece here is also Zone C2 neighborhood commercial, but everything north of that is essentially a residential planned development district. I also wanted to point out that there's a common driveway that is difficult to see here, but that common driveway is supposed to be the means by which this piece is access. So there's restricted access here all along Crawford, and so this driveway here is the means by which this is to be accessed. And we don't know long term, but certainly this site is vacant and available, and if there was a redevelopment of the site, just so everybody knows, this property is zoned that could accommodate an expansion or repackaging of that use, but that property is currently owned by Larry Curran and Kelly Dunn, who are the owners of this up here. So that is kind of a summation. John, if you want to go back to one of the photographs of the building itself. And we do have Clay Brazier here from Quick Shop to explain their purposes, but essentially, as we understand it, is to remove all these wood shake shingles and replace those with a conventional asphalt shingle roof. As the Planned Development District currently reads, that would not be permissible, and that's why this is before you today.
Before we have the applicant come up, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Andrew?
I do.
Ken.
Dean, a quick question would be, how would removal of the existing architectural standards impact the landscaping requirements which are typical of all development in Salina?
This obviously was approved in 1979. One thing the Planning Commission did in 2004 was they took note of some missing landscaping, and so they asked for this was done as part of the 2004 action. It was there at one time and went missing, so it was reinstated, but this would be treated the same as any other C2 property in terms of parking lot buffering or landscaping, other than the fact that we have a site plan that was approved in 1979, and so the landscaping for this is still part of the Planned Development District, and you're not lifting that, you're just lifting the restrictions that apply to the building itself.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
All right. Any others? Let's hear from the applicant, okay? Please state your name.
I'm Clay Brazier, Director of Real Estate for Quick Shop. I'll just add a couple of things to what Dean said here. Basically, right now, we don't have any major projects planned. We're just looking at, if you've seen this overhang that goes around the store, it just needs to be addressed. And we feel like we can address that with asphalt, maybe even the shake look type asphalt. We haven't got that in place yet, but that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. Is you got the luxury shakes that kind of, or the luxury shingles that actually look like shakes, that a lot of the houses that used to have shakes are using now, for example. I feel like the original restrictions that were in place here made a lot of sense whenever they were put into place back at that time, but that was with the original plan, with all the other development that would be occurring around it. I think it made a lot of sense to have the same look for the whole development. But with that not really being in the picture anymore, that just leaves our store here by itself. And if we do develop a further plan to do a raise and rebuild or something bigger at this location, we would be right back in here talking about the same thing again and trying to lift this restriction. If any of you guys have seen our new store over on Crawford, it's kind of funny that it has a lot of earth tones and things like that.
Good looking store.
Anyway, but that's kind of our new prototype, and I'd like to do something like that on the east side of Salina at some point. I don't know when that'll be, but that's kind of the wave of the future for our new stores, and that would require this as well at this location or any other location on the east side. Any questions?
I just comment, I'm delighted to see you're wanting to do something. I've thought the store is in need of some enhancements. It serves that community very well, and it's handy to have it there, so I'm glad to see you're interested in improving it.
I have one comment, and I'll save some for after it's back up here, but I wondered for quite a while why that place was looking so sad. That's a sad building right now with those shakes that way. If you drive up there and pump gas, and now I understand why it hasn't been fixed, because of the shake shingles. So
Right.
I
And-
learned something here.
And I think there's a couple other things we need to look at as we're planning this, because you've got kind of the vertical part up there and then the slope. So I don't know if it would all be asphalt or if it would be different on the slope versus the top, but we're going to have to, we haven't got that far along with the process.
Is it conceivable that you could acquire the property next to and expand into both those lots?
You never know. Could be.
Not something you're actively pursuing at the moment, though, I see.
Have not pursued
Any
that
other
at this
questions
point.
about the application for the applicant?
Well, this may or may not be, it's relevant perhaps to the overall appearance. And I'm going by the pictures. This is testimony. I drive by there regularly and need to consciously think about that. But does the landscaping, appropriate to Commissioner Kennedy's questions, does it meet the current landscaping regulations?
I can't say that it does. What we've tried to do is make sure that it meets the landscaping regulations that were imposed by the Planning Commission in 1979. That is the current landscape ordinance was adopted in 1994. So this landscaping was required by the Planning Commission in 1979 as part of the site plan approval. So our job is to make sure that that is maintained in that fashion. But I can't tell you that what is there today meets the letter of our 1994 landscaping regulations, because it predates, the site predates those regulations.
Mm-hmm. Well, just in line with Commissioner Box's comments, I agree that it could use some sprucing, and the roof isn't perhaps the only thing. So, yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah, I think there isn't a sprinkler system or sod, and those were not things that were required at the time. But there's grass there, and there's shrubs, and there's a couple little trees and those kinds of things. So, I mean, it's not a concrete jungle by any means.
Right.
Anything else? Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Bring it back up here for any discussion or questions among ourselves.
Public?
Oh, excuse me, this
Yeah.
is a public hearing. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Members of the public would like to speak to this.
We have not heard anything back from like I said, Larry Curran owns the property that the townhomes occupy to the north and to the east, and we did not hear any comments back from Sterling House or from Mr. Curran, so we simply didn't get any feedback on this request.
Seeing none, bring it back up here for any more discussion.
Any questions?
Wasn't it interesting that something that you tried to apply some aesthetic rules to later on down the road is the albatross in the neighborhood? So,
Well, yeah, my thinking would be is that if there had been a shopping center developed with that particular mansard shake shingles, that developer would be in here redoing all that as well.
Yeah.
It's an architectural design whose time was fairly brief, and shake shingles are just not what people use anymore. So it's kind of interesting, yeah,
Yeah.
it really is.
The
In some
insurance company
circles,
wouldn't
they're
approve
viewed
at
to
all.
be somewhat of a potential fire hazard as well. Some jurisdictions don't allow wood shake shingles for that reason.
We need a motion. I'd make one if you're ready.
Sure.
I mean, unless there's other discussion about
I can do it one
value
more
of-
time.
that's what Ken does.
I'd make a motion that we approve application PDD 04-5A as requested by Quick Shop, requesting an amendment to lift the existing restrictions to allow the proposed upgrade and roof changes to be made to their existing store.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? I'm going to get one last word in. It's nice to be old occasionally. I was principal at Meadowlark School when, before Fairdale was Fairdale all the way out, and this particular request for this shopping, or this convenience store went in, and it was a big deal then. That was a major, major concern that we were going to put retail in East Salina, and so I understand the difficulty that a planning commission had in terms of trying to find something that they thought was going to fit. So there are some advantages to being around for 40 years doing something. You begin to really see how things change. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Well, we can say on that note that back in 1976, there were 4 planning commission hearings that were continued on this particular item because it was not an easy decision for the planning commission to allow commercial along East Crawford. So, as far as other matters, we will meet on the 16th. 16th is the annual business meeting for the planning commission, meaning that we will elect officers for the coming year, and we will seek volunteers or appointments to the Board of Zoning Appeals and Heritage Commission. And then, as I noted, we have 2 unfilled positions, 1 in-city resident, 1 out-of-city resident. We'll continue working with the clerk's office to see if we have expressions of interest on that. We also...
Dean, I'm sorry, one quick technical question. I know you said before, but the out-of-city, the boundaries outside city
you have to live
limits
within
are
3 miles of
3
the city, outside but within 3 miles. So
Within 3
Mr.
miles.
Kusick lives outside but within 3 miles of the city.
Yeah.
Mr. Welsh lived outside but within 3 miles of the city, and Mr. Bossmeyer, Mr. Welsh, and Mr. Perney all decided not to seek reappointment.
Right.
So we need 1 outside the city resident and 1 inside the city resident. And then we're going to try to build up our Board of Zoning Appeals so that Planning Commission doesn't have to do double duty there. We will have 1 item for sure on the 16th, which is a request, again, to amend a plan development district that requires all attached twin home dwellings, and we have somebody that wants to have a single family non-attached dwelling, and that will be coming to you on the 16th. Then October 7th is when we generally do the Planning Commission's annual landscaping awards. So if you have, as you drive around and you see a particularly well done or well maintained project and you want to bring that to staff's attention or nominate one, we'd certainly like to hear from you on that. And then we won't have it for the 7th, but the 2 existing vapor lounges have until the 31st of October to obtain conditional use permits, so they need to be getting their applications in, and we have at least 4 requests lined up now for the distributive antenna systems through Idea Tech that are going to require notice and public hearing for you to review. This is locations where they wish to erect a new pole for antennas in residential zoned areas.
1 company, 4 locations.
1 company, 4 locations, 4 applications, 4 notifications areas. So you can visualize it. The 4 locations, 1 is in the right-of-way adjacent to what we call Country Club Park, which is there with Country Club and Crestview and those streets there. 1 is on Marymount Road in the right-of-way adjacent to Gypsum Hill Cemetery. 1 is Marymount Road south of Crawford on the east side in the right-of-way. And 1 is, oddly enough, in drainage right-of-way, is located east of Magnolia and south, or excuse me, east of Ohio, south of Magnolia by those reserves at Prairie Glen Apartments. So those all cannot be approved administratively. They have to be reviewed by you, and they are trying to get their network up and running, so they may all be considered by you at one hearing, but they are 4 applications, each rise and fall on their own merits.
Dean, have any of those been approved administratively, and if so, how many?
Not yet, but I have 26 of them on my.
Yeah.
So what I did was I went through
Bring a
and
sandwich.
sorted them, and I've got 26 that are in the administrative category and 4 that are in the planning commission category. So we tried to design the ordinance so we'd encourage them to use the administrative process and not use you. So, but we will be meeting the 16th of September and the 7th of October. And looks like the 21st of October would be the first of our Vapor Lounge for your consideration. Also, on the 7th of October will be the referral from the City Commission just to look at possible definitions that would define parking lot, parking area, driving aisle, outdoor storage, staging area, things that would help explain the terms in the proposed parking surfacing ordinance. And so that was initiated by the City Commission, but it still is referred to you for any comments or input that you have. So we'll keep you busy for the foreseeable future, but we would like to hear from you on any landscape projects that you see as worthy of recognition.
I have a question on this October 3rd Planning Commission training in Wichita that you put on our tables.
Yes.
If we're interested in that, or one session of it in particular, just call and register ourselves. That's the plan.
You can coordinate through us, and we'll see if we can. We may have some funds that would help pay for the. We couldn't necessarily help you get there, but we could certainly help with your registration and the payment of said if there's any of those that you're particularly interested in. We wanted you to be aware of that. There's not always good opportunities for Planning Commission training, but they particularly set this up to have a tract that would be on Friday that might be of interest to planning commissioners, where you get to hear from people besides your own staff.
Well, the zoning from enforcement to incentives is interesting to me, as we've talked about, ways to improve our community, and possibly that would, and Olathe, I think, is presenting that. I just noticed that. So I'd be interested in that. The commission wouldn't mind if I attended.
Incentives, if your project conforms with the comprehensive plan, then it's incentivized as opposed to not conforming. So that even though it's designed for planning commissioners, Dustin and I will probably be attending that as well, because we're curious. But Dustin and I will be attending that conference, and we wanted to make you aware of that opportunity as well. And if you're interested, you can, Sue Klein is the one that's setting everything up for Dustin and I, and if you contact Sue, let her know of your interest, then we can try to get you enrolled as well.
That'd be great.
Thank you. And this would be primarily for the session intended primarily for city planners,
yeah,
right?
there are
Not for the whole thing.
sessions that are set up specifically for, there's a planning commission rate, there's a planning, and it's designed to, ours cover Thursday and Friday, but they've targeted Friday for the planning commission sessions, and they've got some pretty good people lined up. And like I said, it's good when you only hear from your own staff. It's good for you to have an opportunity to hear from others and quiz them and ask questions. And so that is the idea, is to allow planning commissioners to get exposed to ideas from other places.
So just call Sue.
Call Sue.
Thank you.
Any other matters?
Mr. Chairman, I think we have a comment.
Randall Holm, Hometown Realty, 311 East Crawford, Salina. I'm also a Salina resident. I'm here today to speak on an issue that I thought was going to be before your board today, and since the agenda was late in being released, I came and sat through the whole meeting, and now I find out maybe it's going to be addressed on October 7th, which is a date I may not be able to be here. And this has to do with the changes in the paving regulations within the city. I was part of the code process when the current code was passed in 1994. And we had a lot of public comment at that point in time about hard paving, gravel paving, and that. There was push to do the same thing that's being done now. And at that point in time, it was determined that it was both foolish and overly restrictive to property owners. Because the real question is going to be whether it is a good and/or smart move for the city to force a private property owner to spend an extra $3,000 to $30,000 in paving costs the next time that owner is considering making some major improvements to their property. The supposed intent is good. A lot of people think gravel or permeable parking is ugly. A lot of other people think it's a whole lot less ugly than non-permeable paving and that. There's a move across the country to require permeable paving instead of non-permeable or hard surface paving in communities all over this country for a lot of valid reasons. Our code makes us address runoff regularly in new construction and in new buildings every day, because in particular in Salina, where we're surrounded by a levee, water that falls within the city is a problem, both containment and getting rid of it. Every time we turn around, it seems like government's wanting to take personal choices and rights away from the individual. And it's just simply wrong in this situation to move to a more restrictive paving requirement. I've been involved in selling and rehabilitating and maintaining properties in Salina most of my life, and in particular as an adult since 1975 as an investor and a real estate salesman in Salina, and a broker since about 1980 or 81. I feel that this change in many instances will accomplish just the opposite of what the city plan claims it wants accomplished. I feel that it will cause many properties that do not meet your ideas or the staff's ideas as attractive enough to stay distressed properties longer due to the potential additional immediate cost to those that might otherwise choose to improve them or buy them to improve them. If I'm an investor and I'm looking at a property that's in a neighborhood and it's a distressed property at all, or just an older property and it hasn't been renovated in a long time, as that investor, I may be willing to purchase the property at the going market rate and invest the money to upgrade it and make it a more desirable investment property, or to flip the property for residential ownership. Often that cost hits or exceeds 50% of the value of the property at the time it's purchased. So a lot of those properties are going to fall under the guideline that then require, if it has permeable parking, that all that parking has to be replaced with hard surface paving or removed. Because I believe that would be an option also, wouldn't it, Dean?
Well,
I could just remove the off-street parking and then there's not a problem with it being permeable.
only if it's optional parking. If it's required parking, it can't be removed.
Okay, so it would be a mandated cost at least for 1 or 2 spaces to be
Right.
paved. Okay, so we couldn't remove it. But that could kill the deal, because you're talking anywhere from $3,000 to $30,000 in paving costs, depending on what's involved and what would have to be paved. Especially if part of my plan was to put a detached garage up at the back of the property, which on most of the older properties in town, which is where most of the current permeable or gravel parking happens, is located. They're not wide enough to put an attached garage on. It's one of the reasons they've never had one, is as the codes became more strict and side yard requirements got larger and larger, we can't put attached garages on them. I've driven around Salina since this issue first became apparent to me about a month ago, and I think I've seen as many hard surface paved driveways that look just as horrible or worse than the gravel driveways I've seen. We currently have codes in place that can address what the claim problem is improperly maintained driveways. We currently have codes and rules that can be enforced. If I've got potholes, it's collecting water and there's mosquitoes, or it's not really paved anymore, we've got current code. They can be issued a citation and required to make improvements. We don't need to force everybody to put hard surface paving down as the only option. I feel that this new code will decrease potential property value for those that own properties that have gravel driveways because of the proposed changes, because the new owners will be limited on what they can do with the property without the cost of hard paved parking being involved. It's not unusual for $10,000 to $15,000 in remodeling costs to increase the value $35,000 to $45,000. The old rule used to be you ought to get a 3-for-1 return on your investment, or it's probably not a good investment to be making in property renovation. So it's real easy for that renovation to also exceed 50% of the value, whether it's increasing square footage or not. As a property owner, an investment property owner in Salina, I've owned property with gravel driveways. I've owned property with paved driveways. And quite honestly, I see no difference in what I can get in rent for that property, whether it's a gravel driveway or a concrete driveway. Now, my tenants do want a driveway because they do want to get off street. Another part of the city plan that we need to think of is they're wanting to get people off-street parking. If you limit your choices on what you can put in for off-street parking, you're going to reduce the increase of off-street parking being put in around the city. Not just in the older neighborhoods, but in the newer neighborhoods, where as youth hit driving age and vehicles start accumulating in the front, on the curb, a choice could be additional paving, either short-term, while those kids are still at home, or long-term. My dad handed me my brother and me a shovel and said, if you want to get a car when you turn 16, start digging and we'll pave an extra place for you to park because you're not going to block my car. And that. But concrete's expensive, people. Safety codes, we're already fighting people parking in the yard and that. I just feel that this hard paving, for a lot of reasons, and another good reason is environmental. As I mentioned before, you increase runoff when you increase paved parking. One of the city commissioners commented that he was in Colorado recently in one of the new buildings similar to our Bicentennial Center in the community, and I thought I heard him say Aspen, but I don't think it was Aspen. Maybe Dean remembers the community.
Loveland.
Loveland, thank you, Loveland. They used gravel parking for all of the parking for that multi-use building. And part of the reason is to decrease runoff. In a lot of the older neighborhoods, I believe we still have a combination storm sewer, sanitary sewers combined. So when you increase runoff, you're putting additional load on our sanitary sewer system also in those situations. In addition to, you're not replenishing the water table by that water being able to go through permeable parking and into the ground water level and help maintain city groundwater for our wells. We increase flooding, which increase risk. I ask that you reconsider the current plan to drastically change paving requirements within the city of Salina. I think the 1994 code addresses it properly. I think we were maybe for a change ahead of the rule when we didn't go to hard paved parking requirements totally, like's being suggested now. Around the country, we're seeing a move to permeable paving instead of hard surface paving. All you have to do is look at a lot of our commercial buildings in the city that have older asphalt parking lots, and I tell you, you all but take your life into your own hands when you drive through their better looking paved parking and that.
Well, I thank you very much. I mean, I appreciate your points, and I appreciate your concern my concern for our time. You've made very articulate in letting us know that you would like for us to reconsider that, and that you believe that permeable is better than non-permeable, and that there's a cost factor, and there's some safety issues, and I've jotted those down, and I think all the commissioners here have listened to that very carefully. If and when that comes back to us, we'll try to recall those if you're not here. If you're here, we'd invite you to come back and speak again.
I'll try to make it. I don't know if I'll be able to.
Right.
Just let me add in case I'm not able to. I've been in communities where they're building $3 to $6 million homes with permeable paving because of the environmental concerns that I mentioned. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
We just want to clarify that the City of Salina does allow permeable, there is such a thing as permeable concrete paving, and that is allowed, but it's more expensive to install even than conventional paving, and also it takes some really specialized training to actually correctly install it, and not just anybody, not just any contractor can install pervious paving.
Well, I'm sure this is going to come up in other meetings, and so I appreciate the input now. If there aren't any other matters,
Possibly he could submit it, he had written notes to
Oh.
Dean to be included in the
Yeah.
packet.
Well,
but it doesn't
and
come
it
to
will
us.
Right.
also, Crystal has taken all of Mr. Holmes'
I was
comments,
going
which
to say,
will be in
if
the
you have
minutes.
those notes, those could be made available as part of our packet of study at another point, and you can just give them to them with our, okay?
Right.
All right. And if there is nothing else, we stand adjourned. Thank you, ma'am.
75% of the birds that have been exposed to the eggs refuse to eat them again. That's a real success story.
But the danger of outwitting a jay is that the bird can outwit you back.
Ravens, crows, jays, they're really, really smart.
At a nearby campsite, researcher Elena West of the University of Wisconsin